Chelsea's board might be hoping they've signed the next Pep Guardiola in Enzo Maresca, but supporters will find the incoming Leicester City boss more reminiscent of a possession-based manager they won't remember too fondly, former Blues boss Maurizio Sarri. Although I'm not a Foxes supporter, I've attended every home game during their promotion campaign, having relocated to the city in 2021. This has given me an informed yet unbiased perspective on what watching Enzo ball is really like, and it certainly has some shortcomings. Style of play: Enzo ball often left fans frustrated. Anyone looking at Leicester's season from afar will assume that the former Manchester City assistant only has admirers within the King Power Stadium. Instantly reviving a relegated team to bounce back to the Premier League at the first time of asking is never easy, but the Midlands club finished the campaign in first place, a position they established early on and held pretty much all season. And yet, Leicester City supporters indifferent to news of the Italian leaving for Chelsea are in copious supply, not least because style of play was often a massive frustration for those in attendance at Leicester's home games. The Foxes scored less open-play goals at home than fellow promoted sides Ipswich and Southampton last season, and on average required 461 passes to score each one. In comparison, Leeds required 435, Southampton required 365 and Ipswich needed just 274. Despite finishing top of the league, Leicester ranked 5th for shots at home while averaging 65% possession, the second highest rate throughout the championship, and that's where the Sarri comparisons will become particularly prevalent for Chelsea fans. During the Italians' only season at Stamford Bridge, Chelsea's average possession per game in the Premier League was only surpassed by 98-point title winners Manchester City, yet they scored the fewest goals of any team in the top 6. There is an understandable obsession with possession in modern football. Guardiola has established ball retention as an integral characteristic of any top team. But there is a misconception that possession football means entertaining football. It may leave purists foaming at the mouth, but possession without penetration can be as frustrating and mind-numbing as Tony Pulis and Sam Allardyce long-balling each other into a 0-0 draw. Perfect football has a tendency to sterilize and sanitize. It's the imperfections that create chaos and make games so exciting. Lots of passes, lack of goals, leaving the handbrake on. In fairness to Maresca, it's difficult to entertain supporters when the opposition won't give you the space needed to pull teams apart. Most teams that visited the King Power Stadium this season created the lowest of low blocks and tried to hold on without conceding for as long as possible. Very few allowed gaps between the midfield and defense or behind the back line to emerge, but even when facing less competitive opposition, Maresca always seemed to keep the handbrake on. Rather than using possession to checkmate defenses into conceding well-crafted team goals, the Leicester boss appreciated it more from an attritional standpoint, constantly moving the ball around to physically and mentally grind opponents down. Maresca's resistance in moving away from that strategy regardless of the opposition resulted in the Foxes often failing to kill off significantly weaker teams. Instead, allowing games that could have been wrapped up within the first half hour to drag on and regress into a keep-ball training ground exercise. Leicester ranked below Norwich, Hull City, Leeds, Ipswich and Southampton for first-half goals, and there were only 4 championship games all season in which they scored twice before half-time. Relegation-threatened Sheffield Wednesday were the only team Leicester managed to score 2 first-half goals against at home. On average, it took Leicester 34 minutes to find a second goal after scoring in the first half, and for home fixtures that statistic was even greater at 40 minutes, nearly an entire half of play. In some instances, refusing to go for the kill early on came back to haunt Leicester. They scored first against Sheffield Wednesday, Leeds and Ipswich, in both fixtures, yet failed to find a second goal and eventually surrendered points. Foxes became predictable, Maresca refused to change. In turn, Leicester became increasingly predictable as the season went on. Before losing 1-0 to Leeds in November, there was talk of a record-breaking championship points haul, but eventually Leicester didn't even claim a place in the division's all-time top 10 in that respect. Ipswich, QPR and Middlesbrough all came to the King Power Stadium in the second half of the season with the same game plan: avoid sitting too deep, turn over possession in Leicester's defensive third by setting traps and break in 2s and 3s, and all took points off them. Worryingly, that also seemed to trigger a run of shock 1-0 defeats on the road to Bristol City, Millwall and Plymouth. The context of where Chelsea are as a club right now is different to Leicester's. Teams won't set up against them in the same way as championship opposition have done against the Foxes, and the Blues have a different caliber of player with technical qualities that will better suit a possession game. There's nothing to suggest history on the pitch will repeat itself at a different club, except, of course, for Maresca's own words. The man himself said in April as fan frustrations over his tactical stubbornness began to boil over, "We have our way to try to win the game since the start. I can understand sometimes that they, the fans, want us to attack more direct. But it's not going to happen, never, while I'm here." But for Chelsea, their supporters and particularly those who attend Stamford Bridge every week, an era of testing tactical stubbornness, predictable pitfalls and irritating idealism may only be just beginning. Enzo Ball isn't as effective or entertaining as Leicester's first-place finish might suggest.